Okay, I want to welcome you all to this next video. This is an introduction. We're going through some information on ethics, and I want you to take a look at these questions that are here on the screen, if you will, and kind of think about them. Um, and within yourself, one would be totally disagree, five would be I agree. Does culture determine what is moral? Is there such thing as right and wrong? Do people have a right to their own opinion? Is religion the source of morality? I tend to do what best serves their interest. And so you need to begin to think about these questions. We'll kind of go through some of these as the course goes on. But I want to point out to two definitions from the last video, and that is ethics and morality. How do we determine what those definitions are? My wife is a kindergarten teacher, and she's all the time doing cutesy things, and she says, you need to do cutesy things with your classes. And I said, well, don't do cutesy things. But I came up with Mr. Smiley Face right here. Mr. Smiley Face shows up when there are words that are important. These could be definition words. These could be terms that you need to know. And so whenever you see Mr. Smiley Face up in the corner, sometimes he looks a little different, but he's always in the corner. You need to know that those words are important. Star them on your notes, whatever you want to do. So I'm going to wait to hear from you in cyberspace what the terms ethics and morality are. We discussed these in the last videos, and we define ethics as the process of determining right and wrong. How do we go about that? That is separate from morality, which refers to the content of right and wrong. And remember that in this course, we use these two words right here distinctively of each other. We do not use them interchangeably. So make sure that you have that down in your mind. One of the great authors of the 20th century, I believe, is C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis wrote the Chronicles of Narnia books. I wrote a lot of other books during the early part of the 1900s through World War II. And he describes morality in three parts. The first part would be our external relationship. How do we interact with other people? How does our morality, when we choose what is right and wrong, how does that interact with other people? I hear people say all the time, what I do does not affect, well, my moral choices do not affect other people. And that is not true. It does in some way. It can affect other people. There is an internal part. That is our motives. What drives us? We talk about the virtues that are within us. And so that is on the inside. The third part is serving proper goals and purpose. What is the moral direction that we want to head? Now, C.S. Lewis describes these three kind of like music. See, externally, if I'm playing an instrument, I'm playing a piece of music, I have to make sure that I'm in the same spot with everybody else playing that music. Internally, I want to make sure that my instrument's in tune. But serving proper goals, is the music appropriate for the occasion? No one wants to go to a wedding, and as the bride gets ready to walk down the aisle, the groom starts singing All My Exes Live in Texas. That's not an appropriate song. Or no one wants to go to a funeral and hear somebody sing The Devil Went Down to Georgia. Those aren't appropriate songs. And so we think about morality as a whole, but in three parts: the external, the internal, and serving proper goals. Now, moral philosophy, currently, there are some trends out there. One is what we call deontology or deontological ethics and utilitarian ethics. They are kind of similar to each other. Both talk about outweighing the good and the bad, focus more on corrective behavior. We will look at existential ethics in just a second. And then teleological ethics, we talked about that in the natural law. But we want to analyze and evaluate things in light of universal principles. Now, there are two terms that you need to know. One is what is called theoretical ethics, or what is called a meta-ethic. Now, meta-ethics, every company, every place you work, groups have what is called a meta language. Now, there are terms that are used at Lenore Community College that may be different than they are at a different community college. That's called a meta language. And so in meta ethics, we talk about foundations, and that's what we're building here in this video. We're beginning to build a foundation to make sure that we have a good foundation before we move on to anything else in the course. A lot of students say, well, I just want to talk about issues. We can't talk about issues until we've built a foundation. Normative ethics gives us those guidelines and those behaviors, what is acceptable. And we will break these down into a little bit further sections as we go through. Now, normative ethics affects everything personally. That is what we call, and in your notes, put this down, applied ethics. This is where we talk about issues like abortion. How does that affect us personally, socially, environmentally? War, personally, socially, environmentally. This is where we talk about the issue of applied ethics. And it gives us a reason that we take on certain issues. Metaethics, on the other hand, is the basic starting point to morality. And unless we are grounded in a meta-ethic, everything we discuss is arbitrary. Nothing we discuss will matter if we're all in different spots. So that's where we build this foundation. Now, this chart is in your notes, and it breaks down meta-ethics into two areas. So we have the non-cognitive side, and we have the cognitive side. Now, cognitive means that you're thinking. You're using this thing right here. Or as we would say, we're thinking. Non-cognitive then means you're not thinking. Okay? And you see here that there's only one theory. We'll spend just a minute talking about it, and then that's it. But we focus on both the relative side and the universal side. Now, not all of these are we going to discuss during the course of the semester. That would take up the whole semester or 2 semesters, but we're just going to focus in on a few of them. So emotivism, here we're going to spend just a minute. Emotivism is simply says there are absolutely no moral truth. Everything is just an expression of feeling. And I relate this to a 2 or 3 year old kid in the checkout line at Walmart who wants a candy bar and throws himself down on the ground until they get what they want, and then it's over. That's emotivism. It's an outburst of feelings, and then it's gone. And so there aren't any moral truths. I just want to express my feelings, and then I pitch my fit, and then we're done. And so that's why this non-cognitive, there's no process into it of why we would do that. But we focus in on the idea of relativism versus universalism. Now, relativism states, okay, morality is going to be different for different people. And there's different ways. It could be individual, cultural, religion, but somehow it separates one group of people from a different group of people's moral ideas, or one person's moral ideas from a different person's moral idea. Universalism, then, on the other hand, says that there are moral truths that exist for everybody, regardless of who they are. Um, moral truths that apply to all people. I am a universalist. I believe that there are moral truths that apply to all people, and we're going to look at both of these sides as we go through the next couple weeks. Relative theories are theories like, for example, ethical subjectivism. Ethical subjectivism says you, as an individual person, decide what's moral for you. I decide what's moral for me. You can't tell me that I'm wrong. I can't tell you that you're wrong. Each individual person decides what's moral. On the other hand, culture or relativism says that morality is created, and this is the key word in any relative theory. The key word is the word created. Ethical subjectivism is created. Cultural relativism is created. It is created by a group of people. That differs from different society. One group over here says, hey, this is moral. This group over here says, no, this is moral. The last one is a long definition, so you may want to pause if I get done talking before you're done writing, is the divine command. Now, in this sense of divine command, when we discuss this, we will use God in a general sense. And we will discuss that as we get there. But there's no universal principle. Morality is dependent on what that person or that group believes that God may be telling them. And so it differs from person to person and even religion to religion. So these three relative theories we are going to discuss as we go through this semester. We will also look at some universal theories. These apply to all people. And the difference here is that in universal theories, morality is discovered. Right? It is not created. We learn from tradition, history, what morality is. And we learn that. We don't create it either individually or as a group. And so morality is discovered rather than created. And these principles exist outside of my opinion or your opinion or society's opinion. And we begin to understand that. There are also what we call absolutes. In science, there are absolutes. In math, there are absolutes. There are absolutes that exist. There also are absolutes that exist in morality. And so we say moral absolutes. Those are things that are always true or things that are always false. One area that we also need to discuss, and this is going to approach in on the assignment that you have to do, the questions that you need to answer on Jerry Sandusky and David Nasser that you need to look up, is the idea of metaphysics. Now, physics, if you take a physics class, maybe at Lenore, is the idea of how things work. Well, metaphysics is that question of what does it mean to be human? What's the meaning of life? What's the nature of reality? Why am I here? All those great philosophical questions that we love to discuss and we love to answer. You know, do we have a free will? Things like that. Now, metaphysics is broken down into two areas. The first area is what we call dualism. Now, dualism has the idea that we're made up of two parts, a body and a spirit. But more than that, that we understand that in order to have a good life, we have to understand moral truths. The problem sometimes with dualism is that a hierarchical system can be created. Gandhi fought what was called a caste system. Now, a caste system in India basically looked like a triangle, and at each level there were different groups of people. At the bottom was called the untouchables. Okay? Now, in a caste system, if you are in this group right here, you can never move up, you never move down. So if I'm an untouchable, I am always an untouchable. In metaphysical dualism, the idea is that if I'm in this system right here, everybody below me is less moral than I am. So you had the caste system in India, you had the feudal system in Europe during the Middle Ages. All those relied on a system that said, hey, wherever I am, everybody else below me is less moral than I am. Now, on the other hand, we talk about metaphysical materialism. This just says, hey, we are determined by our physical body. You know, our genes make up who we are. Phrases like, born this way, this is the way I am, those idea that we're just a body, our genetic makeup determines who we are. And in ethics, we call that determinism. Now, determinism says there is no free will whatsoever. The genes you're born with, how you grew up, all those determine who you are. You cannot break free of that. That's who you are. There's no free will. We're simply governed by unconscious forces, and our behavior is determined by past events in our lives, and that's who we are. And so the questions that you need to answer this week, one of the questions is, are people like Jerry Sandusky and Larry Nassar, are they simply a product of their biology and their environment, or do they have a free will? Do they have the ability to make that decision? Well, some people would say, well, they're pedophiles. That's who they are. So that's the question I'm asking you to answer, is to consider. Do you think they're a product of that, or do they have a free will choice? There's a book out there, because I know every college student has a lot of time to read. It's a book called The Abuse Excuse. It's by a guy named Alan Dershowitz. And he writes this book about the idea that the abuse excuse is used too often to get people off criminally. And so that there's this syndrome idea, because I was the middle child, I should not be held responsible for my actions because I was adopted. There's a personal favorite story out of this book that describes what is called, and listen, the Twinkie defense. Back in the 1970s, a gentleman entered the San Francisco City Hall and he shot two people. At his trial, his defense attorneys tried to say that because of his junk food of diet, diet on junk food, such as Twinkies, caused an imbalance in his brain that made him shoot the two people. And it became known as the Twinkie defense. And so that's my personal favorite. Um, and so, are we products of our environment and our biology and our past lives? And that's who you are. You're going to be stuck like that. Or, on the other hand, are we existentialists? Do we believe that we are defined by our free will choice and that we can come up with our own moral behavior to determine who we are? And we have the responsibility to create that freedom. There's a phrase I use a lot that predisposition is not predestination. What we've been predisposed to is not the same as where we will be. Correlation is not a causation. There is no correlation between what we will be. We make that choice of who you are today. I want you to understand, as we finish up here in just a second, that there are three actions of how we define moral actions. Now, my daughter has a saying that she uses a lot. I'm just saying. So I'm just saying that you want to understand the difference between the first two that we will talk about, because you will see that again on a quiz. I'm just saying. So the first one is morally permissible. Now, morally permissible actions are actions that we can do. We can either do them, we don't have to do them, no moral guilt whatsoever. So the doctor says you need to exercise. I can exercise or I cannot exercise. There's no moral guilt with it. Okay? I can drink water, I can drink Pepsi. There's no moral guilt associated with it. Okay? Morally permissible actions. Okay? Write this down in your notes. Morally permissible actions have a non-moral value. Okay? They have non-moral value. There's no moral value associated whatsoever. On the other hand, morally obligatory actions do have a moral value associated with them. Okay? So understand the difference. Morally obligatory, we are obligated to. They have a moral value. So if you are asked a question, do all actions have a moral value to them? Answer, no, because some are moral permissible, some are morally obligatory. And so you need to understand these two words right here. So if I do something I'm not supposed to, there's a moral censure to it. If I don't do something I'm supposed to, there's a moral censure to it. The last one is what is called supererogatory. Now these go beyond the call of duty. So I'm not required to do it, but if I do it then there's moral praise to it. So I'm driving home, I see a house on fire, somebody says my kids are stuck inside. While I'm not obligated to run into that fire, if I do, that becomes a morally supererogatory action. On the other hand, if I'm a firefighter, I am required to. That's my job. And so I need to understand the difference there. But it goes beyond. Even we still say that firefighters are brave. There's still an action to it. The last thing I want you to get down is how do we define ethical norms? The first area is what we call Antinomianism. It means against the law, or there's no binding law. It was actually the idea of antinomianism, the against the law, that Adolf Hitler used in writing his book in 1924, The Mein Kampf, to justify the killing of the Jews. It was Darwinism based on that. The superior Aryan stock. A lot of that stuff has come out of Antinomianism. Generalism says, okay, there are some general guidelines, there's some general rules. Conflicts do not exist because we allow for exceptions. Situationism says that, hey, there's only one universal truth. That's to do the right thing. And my conflicts do not arise because I look at the situation. And we see this a lot today in our society. You have somebody that says, well, I'm against abortion. Then maybe finds herself with an unplanned pregnancy, and now that her situation has changed, now her ethics changes. And the danger with situationism is that we are always changing our ethic to allow for the right situation. Even though Joseph Fletcher says it's done in the framework of love, you never really have a firm footing because your situation is always changing. The last three are universal. The first three were relative, the last three are universal. This first one is what's called conflicting absolutes. Now, conflicting absolutes says this: I may have to break one moral value in order to keep another moral value. But in doing so, each one, to keep one and break one, is still wrong. And so we understand that. And so if I had to keep one in order to break another, it's still wrong. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer took part to an assassination plot to murder Adolf Hitler. So murder is wrong, but allowing innocent people to be slaughtered is also wrong. So if I take part, killing somebody is wrong, even though I'm saving people. But on the other hand, if I say I can't murder somebody, watching innocent people is also wrong. Be murdered is also wrong. So there are conflicting, and sometimes I do have to break one to keep another one, but it's still wrong to break that one. On the other hand, graded absolutism says, okay, my absolutes are in a hierarchical system. So think of for a moment, that is a pretty bad ladder. Think of a ladder, roughly here. I may have a lower value here, and I have a higher value here. It's okay to break the lower value in order to keep the higher value. So Corrie ten Boom tells a lie, lower value, breaks by telling a lie in order to protect people hiding in her house, higher value, that's okay. The problem is that's not always clear. I may think not lying is always better. It's always better to tell the truth. Okay? So there can be some issues there when those can be switched and almost like situationism. Now, the last one is my personal one, but it's a reflection that there are no conflicting moral norms. God's moral truths never conflict. And from a religious aspect, that those conflicting moral norms never change. Now, this is my personal one. The others are pretty concrete. This is my personal one, so I give it to you. You don't got to know it, but you don't have to take it to heart, so to say. Okay? So I want to say this as we finish this first video. Again, always make sure before you start, download the notes. Those are for you to keep, fill out, use. Remember, you want those when you go to take the quiz. Make sure you use your notes to do so. Also, make sure that you're doing any of the activities each week that go along with the videos and the activities. Okay. As always, if you have questions about something that I said, don't hesitate to email me, reach out to me. I will respond to you and help you. We'll get what we can to make sure that we're all on the same page. Everybody has a great week, and make sure that you keep up with all your assignments.